This is the Tesoro AI podcast with Darius Gant. AI is changing the world and fast. This episode is coming to you courtesy of Tesoro AI, the #1 recruiting service for software development and AI talent.
All right, Marcus, welcome to the show. I appreciate you taking some time out to join us.
No, thank you, Darius. It's fantastic to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So would love to kick things off just chatting more about your background, give some folks context into kind of personal and professional career, and also kind of where did AI come into place as you progress through your career as a whole?
No, absolutely. Working with AI in those contexts, but I would kind of frame it under working on data as a whole,
Okay.
in different types of industries, and then applied AI on top of that. But I think one of the things for the audience is really that I'm a data nerd by background, and that's really personal to me. So
Yeah.
I've always, for example, been a runner. I've done track and field, and I've always tracked everything about my own physiology. And I've kind of, I don't know, coming into Prifina, the company that I now run, I've always wished that we had better tools for actually leverage that data that we have. So there's two sides of the coin, if you will. There's the professional background where I've had a chance to kind of delve into the industry a little bit over the past 15 years. But then there's also that personal side that, it would be really cool if we had those AIs that we've been thinking about, in science fiction for so many decades going back, and actually having those come to life.
Yeah, I often think about, if this were actually possible, I don't know whether I would use it or not, but just the ability to kind of real time track your vitals. Hey, if you want to optimize performance, you need to drink a quarter bottle of Gatorade. You're running low on sodium. So, I always thought as an athlete myself, I always thought having access to something like that would be awesome. But in practice, I'm not sure I'd be like, yeah, what does that require, really?
I think the practicality kind of gets in the way. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So for example, I've got this Aura ring on my finger, and the Aura ring tracks my vitals when I sleep, and so on and so forth. And the Aura ring is a fantastic device. I'm originally Finnish. It's a Finnish company, and it's one of these really cool consumer breakthroughs. And I'm not just saying that because some of the founders of Aura are my investors, but it is genuinely a great device. That said, analytics are also very contextual. So for example, if you're an athlete and you got a big game coming up on Sunday, and you've been training really hard up until it, then you take like a couple of days of breather and so on and so forth. And then the day of the game, you have a restless night's sleep, and then you look at your data from your ring, and then it says that, Darius, come on, you need to take it easy today. So if you got a big game that day, what's your instinct? Well, it's going to take the ring and just chuck it out the window, right? Because it doesn't know what you're kind of like. You can't take it easy, like it's go time.
Right.
And I think this is kind of one of those things that data is great, but it's not enough that you have like a very narrow view into one part of the person's life. But you need to kind of be able to have this context of where does it actually fit in. And I feel like that's where oftentimes you kind of have to figure out how do you do that and how much you can actually realistically expect from these tools. But I think we're getting there. It's just really kind of tiptoeing step by step.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so as we think about Prifina, I'm curious, what was the pain point that you saw in the market where you started kind of coming up with, the concept of Prifina?
Yeah. So taking a step back, we like to think of Prifina as the user-controlled data company. And what that really means is we all imagine a future with AI in our lives. But how do we actually know that AI is actually working on our behalf, as opposed to, let's say, some corporate interest or somebody trying to sell you the best Nikes or whatnot? And we kind of realized that in order to get you to really have the AI on your side, you have to control the AI. And the only way that you control the AI is you control the data that goes into the AI. So that's where we kind of started at Prifina with this concept that in order to do exactly what you, Darius, said in terms of having that AI that actually kind of helps athletes, but also helps everybody in their daily life, you need to get that data control. But we kind of break down AI also into a couple of different kind of categories, if you will.
Okay.
Like it's not just going to be one AI. We already got a lot of industry speakers, as I know that you got on the podcast, talking about agents and different types of AI models and so on and so forth. So it's not just one AI, but there's different categories. So the way that we thinking about it is that you're going to have AIs that represent you publicly, and then you're going to have AIs that represent you privately.
Okay.
Or help you privately, if you will. And the things that you and I talked about, for example, like optimizing performance or getting you ready for a big game, I mean, that has to be private because, I mean, that's your data and that's only for you. But then there's other instances, like we've got the Speak to AI project, which basically allows you to create a public facing AI twin where you control what data that has access to. But we oftentimes talk about it as a knowledge twin. So for example, you can build this kind of knowledge base for that, where it will, for example, know your expertise. Like you, Darius, for example, you could take this type of an AI, you could essentially take all the background that you guys do at the AI company that you run, as well as these podcasts, the people that you've spoken to. And then you can make it so that, you know, when somebody's actually listening to the episodes, they could actually ask you that, hey, I'm really interested in this theme around like mining neural network knowledge or whatnot. Have you had a speaker about that? Then your AI twin, not you, but your AI twin could say that, absolutely, I got you. Check out podcast episode 14.
Right.
So I think that kind of, we have to think about AI not just as one singular thing, but many different elements. And especially for us as individuals, then this was the heart of Prifina, that for us to actually get it to work in our own favor and actually help us with our data so that we can actually control the AIs that we have in our lives.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And just thinking about the public facing AI, like the thing that came to my mind is, the thing that came to my mind was there's a ton of questions I get asked, and I just may have the thought me, like, for example, what's a good podcast that you've recorded that I could learn more about X? And I'm like, I have no clue what the company's name is off the top of my head. If I sat here and thought about it and searched through, I could find it. But obviously an AI, the recall of the AI would be able to do that a lot better than what I've been able to do just off the cuff. So I do think, things like that are interesting. And so you mentioned, the basis for Prifina is for users to be able to control their data and for the user to, in a way, be able to control the way that AI uses their data, which in effect, you're influencing the AI, what it's learned, what the output could be. As a user, what does that look like? As a user of Prifina, what does that look like for me? What's the engagement like for me as a user?
So, I mean, let's take that thought of the Darius Gant show and then your AI twin that recalls every single episode perfectly, every single company, every single participant, every single theme, all of it, which is actually, like you said, I mean, that's not a tall order for AI. I mean, it does that really well. Mind you, it also speaks practically every single language, so it does the same thing in practically every single language.
Right.
So what you would do there is basically you would not necessarily think of like, how do you control your data? You would essentially think of like, okay, I want this Darius Gant AI twin. And then the way that you would set it up is that you create a Prifina account, you upload some data into the knowledge base of this AI twin, you choose what it has access to, you tweak it, you give it a role, you tell it, this is who you are. Like you are my incredibly smart podcast, publicly facing podcast host AI twin. After that, you essentially just post it. You post it, for example, first for your friends and so on and so forth to test it out and see how it works. But then after that, you would actually post it on, for example, the podcast sites. And then when people start thinking of, okay, I'd really like to find this episode, then instead of essentially going through all the transcripts themselves, they would talk to that AI twin. Right. Now, there's two different dimensions to this, two different kind of UXs. There's like you as the owner of the AI, and then there's essentially those that are talking to your AI. So for those that are talking to AI, it's very simple. They essentially see your face. They see essentially the things that you've got access to, and then they just start talking. Right now, it's both text and voice. but the voice is just the input. So we haven't yet got that far that we trained it on your voice, but that's certainly going to come down the line. But then you as the owner of the AI, that's where it gets even more interesting because you get analytics on not just what kind of the obvious questions, but because it lowers the threshold for people to talk to you, as it were. I mean, even though you're talking to your AI twin, then you get to find out what are people, what are people interested in? You get to find out what type of podcast episodes do they want to hear that doesn't match what you've got. But then they also essentially, because you're lowering the barrier, you get a lot of really dumb questions in the best way possible. Because there's a lot of things that, I'd be uncomfortable asking you because I feel like, what are you going to think about me if I ask this question? But that kind of becomes very genuine because you see that, okay, people don't really get how Bitcoin mining, for example, works, or they don't get how a neural network, for example, works, or whatnot. And that's one of the most humbling things that you see, that based on the analytics that you get, you can essentially see that, okay, maybe there's an episode that there would be a huge demand in based on those questions. And maybe that's something that you line it up. So it becomes a lot more data driven. Not only that, but then obviously you can improve the AI twin itself because you can just keep dynamically feeding different types of knowledge. It gets better, it responds better to those. And then maybe in the future, when somebody says that I'd be really interested in this machine learning problem for AI, and then if you don't have a corresponding episode, it says that, well, that's great. Would you have an expert that you'd like us to invite? And then you even get like curated recommendations.
Yeah.
I don't think that kind of technical capabilities, especially in something that's consumer facing like this, I don't think that the technical requirements or the technical capabilities are the bottleneck anymore. It's really our imagination and our capacity to actually apply these to what you're doing. Because, for example, the language bit, which for people that have worked with AI is completely common sense, that it's been trained on a lot of really, a huge corpus of information in different types of languages. Therefore, it speaks most languages. It doesn't speak all of them perfectly. It doesn't even speak English perfectly, but, it does a good job. Now, we might speak multiple languages, you and I, but at the same time, we surely don't speak over 50 or 100 or something like that. So this is where kind of the technical capabilities, they're already far surpassing our capabilities. Again, in a good way, but it's really about just harnessing that.
If you're a hiring manager and you appreciate the unique skill sets required to build AI solutions, then I would highly suggest you get your hands on our AI Talent Salary Guide. As you know, one of the greatest challenges in building AI products is acquiring the right team. Over 100 plus pages, we dive deep into our global AI talent acquisition strategies. And with our networks in Latin America, we also provide you with actionable advice on how you can scale up your AI team cost efficiently. Once you explore our AI talent acquisition strategies, you'll never look at hiring the same way again. Links are in the description. So, what I was thinking about is a platform like Coursera, right? Ton of knowledge that sits inside of their platform. And when you take a class, right, you kind of take it from, and I don't know, maybe they even included some features like this, but you're going to have questions along the way, right? And based on all of the classes that they've taught, they probably have an answer to that specific question. This is something where like you all would be able to plug in and say, okay, just upload all of the knowledge, upload all of the things that you're teaching, and then we'll be like your assistant, right? We'll be like your TA, and we'll sit off to the side and the student can ask us questions and we'll respond privately as if we are your TA.
And we are already doing this. So, we are already live in a number of universities as well, not just kind of platforms like Coursera, but like higher education in law schools, where essentially like the teacher's assistant, you'll have the real person, and then you'll have the AI person. And we had just one that came back. They just finished their term, and we had like feedback from over 100 students about these. And it's fascinating. I gotta tell you, it's absolutely fascinating that a lot of these people, they get a lot of value because, again, they can ask dumber questions than they might be comfortable asking a human. They can essentially tell the AI that, tell it to me like if I was 6 years old, and the AI will spell it through. And the more complex the subject matter is, the better it is when the AI actually can kind of really dress it down for you and kind of become this teaching assistant. But what we found is that it's actually incredibly cross-vertical. So, for example, we were talking about athletics before. So we've actually got pro athletes on the platform where pro athletes, I mean, they're not sports physicians, they're not sports coaches, but they have a lot of personal knowledge about what's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them. So if you got somebody like that, I mean, they've obviously got like their day-to-day full and they're really focused. I mean, you know how disciplined these guys are, so they're not going to pick up a random call.
Right.
But at the same time, their AI could. And it's a really interesting idea that could you essentially get like athletes and other experts in various different domains, just make them more accessible. Now, not everybody's going to want that, but at the same time, there are a lot of people. I mean, take like practically every single person on LinkedIn. There's a lot of people that have a lot to give, so to speak, and they're also looking at how do they actually make that more interactive.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating thing. Like I kind of have this idea that, you know, we've had this Star Trek analogy, and I'm sure everybody in AI has had it. But the concept of talking to software, it actually becomes very real in this, that if you essentially have like, you know, maybe as we're doing podcast prep for recording this episode, maybe we're talking to one another's AI twins about like, okay, hey, has Darius talked about this in the past episodes, or does Marcus know about that, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of kind of this lowering of the barrier in terms of just getting farther in the conversation and deeper, quicker. But that's something that I find absolutely fascinating. And you're absolutely right. Like Coursera, but every single marketplace platform, like imagine Airbnb and being able to talk to the hosts of different properties that you visit. Hey, where do you guys typically go on hikes? Is there a really gorgeous waterfall here somewhere? What's your favorite grocer? Is there a farmer's market? Like, yes, they've got those manuals and house rules and whatnot, but are those up to date? I mean, who knows? And then, to be honest, who has time to read them? So the other thing is that if you could just ask them right away, I mean, it kind of brings everything in a very different dimension. So that's what we're super excited about seeing.
Yeah, and given that, you know, an individual or a corporation are essentially uploading their knowledge into this AI or into an AI so that it can be their public facing representation, how do you handle scenarios where the AI, or do you have scenarios where the output of the AI may not be representative of what the user, meaning the person who uploaded their data, that's not what I would have said, right? Or that's wrong. Like, do you have those scenarios, and how do you deal with that? Because I can imagine that if you're, you know, it's an expert, they're like, I would answer it this way. That's either it's totally wrong, or yeah, I see where you were going directionally correct, but this is actually how I would approach it myself.
Yeah. And I think that's where essentially, well, I mean, there's many levels to this, but this is something that we work on quite a lot. So one is effectively that if you got control over the AI, then that means that obviously you have visibility, but you also have different levers that you can change the things that you don't like. So that's the first and foremost, that you need to have control. The second thing is that there's different types of wrong. There's basically factually incorrect, which is where you just make sure that you get the right knowledge in, then it's, you know, based on the real knowledge and kind of returns the right factual information. That's one part. The second part is kind of different things that are more personal to you. Like you said earlier, that's not how I would have answered that. So there's kind of this question of voice and tone and mannerisms and so on and so forth. And we have, I mean, the great thing about this is that we got so many examples. So I'll give you one that we've got somebody that's a really top level expert in data science and machine learning. And they were talking, I was just in Europe and they were just telling me that, you know, their AI is fantastic and so on and so forth, but they've got an audience in crypto and blockchain, and they really don't want to talk about blockchain and crypto. So he just showed me that there was this one question where somebody had asked that, you know, what is the sustainable footprint or the sustainability aspect of mining Bitcoin? And it's not that his AI answered incorrectly per se, but it's rather the fact that he doesn't want to talk about that. Right. So he was telling me that, you know, and we've actually been working on this since, because this is about a month ago, but he actually talked that it would be great if he could introduce sarcasm into that AI, that response. That it's not just like I don't want to talk about Bitcoin, but it's just that I have zero interest in Bitcoin. And if you want to talk about that, talk to somebody else. So these types of things I think are really interesting because it comes more into like how you want yourself to be represented. And I'll give you the third kind of complete extreme. So we start from this default that, people like to talk to people. So I mean, on my AI, I have my face. On your AI, you have your face, and so on and so forth, because you don't want to talk to a company logo. And people engage a lot more in that. But the interesting thing is that as it comes to like tone and voice and so on and so forth, then most people want it to represent them. Or sorry, everybody wants it to represent them, but that means different things for different people. So for somebody, maybe your AI twin, maybe it doesn't sound like you. Maybe it's a little bit snippy, or maybe it's got a little bit of an attitude or something like that. And that's something that we also love, because this concept of like a voice, it's so subjective and it's so contextual. So we talked about like athletes, and we talked about Coursera, and we talked about experts. But let's take, for example, fashion. We've got a lot of, to-be influencers and present influencers in fashion. It's not necessarily that they got a PhD in fashion trends, but it's rather that they got a really good eye on what's going on right now. And that's what people are interested in. They go to them and they say that, I'm going to Paris and I'm planning this and this. What do you think? And then you're going to get the benefit of somebody's opinion. And it's also a fascinating thing that expertise doesn't necessarily need to be a dissertation. It can also be essentially like, what is somebody's outlook on the world? This kind of, coming back to the question, that it comes back to control, but then it comes back to giving the person the control over what do they actually want the AI, what role do they want the AI to play? And based on that, that can mean very clinical knowledge and expertise, but it can also mean nuanced tone of voice and a different way of engaging with your followers based on your own position and where you are in life.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm glad you mentioned that. So in terms, if someone were to not have the answer, or they just didn't upload the data to be able to answer the question, is it then an I don't know response, or would the response be like, let's take how an LLM would respond and we'll use that?
Sure. This kind of, well, first, I mean, we don't typically go to the LLM because we don't want this to be ChatGPT. So, I mean, it doesn't go that. Like, if you ask Darius Gant AI twin about toothpaste, then, I mean, we'd prefer the I don't know answer over toothpaste is X, Y, and Z based on the large training corpus of data. That's one part. But the second part is that, again, it's you're in control. Like, you decide. Like, it can tell you flat out that I don't know about that. Talk to me about something else. Or then it can say that, it can be more polite. It can say that, this is an area that I don't have a lot of information in, but if you're interested, then we can develop this and blah, blah, blah. But the short kind of logic here is that it should be yours and it should feel like yours. So if you're going to talk to my AI about dental hygiene, then I mean, that's not an area that I have a terrific amount of expertise or interest in even. So it's also like, in that case, I don't want it to start kind of making stuff up on the fly. And that's pretty consistent across people, that if you want to talk to ChatGPT, talk to ChatGPT. But if you want to talk to me, or to me by proxy of the AI, then I'm going to kind of contain the knowledge that kind of the subject matter and the themes that I'm allowing it to actually kind of address. One cool thing about this, because I mean, we use a lot of LLMs, and actually a lot of what we're doing it's not really heavy use of the LLMs, because we're doing a lot in the data organization and the data pipeline itself, kind of building up these knowledge bases and the wisdom of your AI and training it and so on and so forth. But the cool thing about the LLM specifically is that when you give the individual control, that you can choose which LLM you use for what purpose. And most people will just go with our recommendation. But some people, they will want that control, that I want to use this one. Like, I want to use Mistral 7B, or I want to use OpenAI's 4.0 or whatnot.
Right.
Those are also developing so fast that a lot of the things that you might worry about, like, is it going to sell your car, for example? And there's a lot of guardrails that are already coming up from these. So obviously we have our own guardrails, but a lot of really brilliant people are spending a lot of time and money on kind of coming up with all of those edge cases. That's also something that when you're kind of starting from the individual point of view, then you get this benefit of, standing on the shoulders of giants like the OpenAIs and the Mistrals and so on and so forth. And you honestly don't have to figure out every single edge case, which I think is a benefit, especially as a consumer-focused AI company, that you just want to make it dead simple for the consumer. You want to make it dead simple to start, to improve, to get better, and then ultimately do what they want to do, which is engage with their audience, grow their business, get more interaction, get more data, and so on and so forth. But they don't necessarily want to fine-tune an AI because you and I know how much work that is, and it's only fractionally fun.
So, keeping with that, if we can go back to the athlete example, right? I'm probably not a techie. I haven't specialized in building software or even AI systems. So, in the life cycle of kind of building and launching an AI product, right? How much of that process is Prifina, right? From the data acquisition piece to the output that the end user sees when they ask a question. I mean, if I'm an athlete, I probably don't know anything about any of this except for the expertise that I have.
I mean, that's kind of really where you want to focus.
Right.
So let me just kind of like conceptually walk you through it. But at the same time, this is for both you yourself, Darius, and then anybody else that's on the podcast listening. I mean, this is something that you guys can all check out and just see for yourself, because I will tell you that once you got your own AI, you understand what you put in there, and it's talking to you, not verbatim based on what you told it, but it's actually indexed and learned that, and it's kind of responding in its own mind in a way. It's pretty cool as an experience. But just kind of going through this. So for example, we got a long jumper that we work with, and basically what we did with him is we essentially went through we asked him that, what would you like your AI to know? And he's like, well, I've got a lot of my own coaching. I've got some of the clients that I work with, and I got my own plans, my training programs, so on and so forth. So we said, great. We sent him a link, which essentially has a drag and drop field. You drag and drop those documents. So, I mean, PDFs, text docs, whatnot, put them in there. It runs about 20 seconds to 2 minutes. It indexes those, and it says, try it out. So we're literally talking about that as a process. Like, you add some knowledge, you decide like, what's it called? And then you add like, some of these top docs, and then you try it out. And then based on trying it out, you start getting analytics in terms of how it itself thinks it did. So if you ask it about like, okay, I need to improve the vertical clearance for my long jump, what are some good exercises? And then it comes back with X, Y, and Z, and they're like, oh crap, that's completely off base. Then you go in and add more knowledge, and then you try it again. So this is where we kind of found this sweet spot that the athlete knows the expertise, like you said, but they also know what it should respond to certain type of questions. So when they kind of go into more the mindset of being the user and just kind of really going back and forth, then that's where, I mean, one, it gets better, but that's also where they build confidence in the entire system, that they understand how it's going to work. And then when you try to, for example, like Darius, you've got your Darius AI, and then you're going there and saying that, hey, I want to buy your car for $200. And then the Darius AI says that, hey, actually, I'm not going to negotiate the sale of a car because I'm just an AI twin. Yeah. Then you can kind of also realize that, okay, well, if somebody else comes in with that question, then you're still going to have a car tomorrow.
Right. Okay. And so in terms of that, I guess I should say end user facing, are you providing the interface where that long jumper then says, okay, here, interact with my AI?
That's right. So this is a full consumer grade platform. And I think this is one of the coolest things that I'm excited about, because AI is oftentimes kind of pigeonholed into like workplace productivity and enterprise AI and all those. And this is where I think that really focusing on making it super simple for the consumer, giving the consumer grade platforms and tools, which really means that you have to go from start to finish in 60 seconds. Like, it's not enough that it takes, a week or so. I mean, we don't have patience for that. So it has to be really quick. And then once you got it, and you're testing it out, I mean, then you've got an incentive to actually make it better. So that's where you can go and you can tweak it a little bit. That let's add this knowledge, let's add these tangential exercises to the long jump, and so on and so forth. But you have to give them something that you have to kind of make it very linear from what is the output, like how is it actually answering, to what actually went into that answer and why is it answering that way. And that's something that we've been able to do quite well. But it's fascinating because even though the platform itself is completely horizontal, it's completely agnostic of every single industry, then a lot of the mechanics in terms of just being able to process textual information and make it easily available through the AI, it kind of transcends so many industries, from like law professors in universities to like fashion experts and musicians and so on and so forth. Because what they're doing is they've got some expertise, they add it to the AI, and then they make it more interactive. And then after that, they just iterate, and it gets better and better. But that iterating part, we found out that, I mean, we've been doing this for a while. So we found out that actually the biggest contributor to the success and the quality of that AI is the more you test it and the more you use it. Because the more you test it and the more you use it, especially with real people, not your friends, because your friends are going to be polite. They're going to ask questions that, they know that you know. But once you kind of introduce it to the internet, you're going to get a lot of questions that, you didn't think about. Yeah. And that's where it essentially leapfrogs very quickly. So we kind of came up with this idea that, fine-tuning these LLMs in our case is not really that relevant, because in something like 2 or 3 weeks of use, it already gets better by so many orders of magnitude. And all you have to do is just figure out like, what are people interested in? And then kind of add the corresponding knowledge in terms of how you want to address that. Like, that's the biggest thing. I think down the line, there will be a lot of really fancy things that we get into, like, for example, voice, avatars, some better ways of actually organizing content and whatnot. But I don't think that's a short-term thing right now. I mean, we're working on a lot of really clever things, but really starting with kind of all of the clever things that already exist in the AIs and bringing them to the consumer and making them easy to use, that already unlocks so many things. So this is something that our users don't really need to wait for anything. And the coolest thing is that they can do things that we don't even really think about. Like the musicians, they're using this platform mainly through Instagram, which is something that's pretty, I mean, we didn't think about that as a distribution channel, but if somebody's looking at their post from Instagram and then they just click their AI and start talking to it, then obviously it makes sense because that's where they are. Right. So this is where it's really cool to be able to follow the users and just see that what are they doing and what do they want to do, and then just make sure that the tooling actually supports that so that they can really build their own channel and their own representations using their AI.
Yeah, and there's a lot of conversation around fine-tuning LLMs. I've spoken with a number of founders who are looking to create some sort of conversational platform where they can have these back and forth conversations with customers. But getting a little deeper into the actual mechanics of that, can you compare and contrast what you guys are doing versus the approach where you're actually fine-tuning an LLM?
So I think one of the biggest things is that if you're fine-tuning, then you're sort of locking yourself into a segment and a narrow vertical. And that's the entire concept of fine-tuning, that you want to essentially build a critical mass in that vertical and be able to go super, super deep into that. And that's fantastic if those verticals are very known and they're very clear and they're static at the end of the day. Our approach is that you can put anything into the knowledge of your AI. So fine-tuning it right away goes out the window at the start because we don't know what you're doing. So the first step is like kind of just getting the relevant things there, getting them indexed and organized and labeled and, just correctly available to the AI. That's already a huge thing. But then when you kind of go into the enterprise cases, then it gets a little trickier because we are primarily a B2C company. Right. And then we do a lot of B2B2C. So we might partner with a company where essentially they might give access to their staff to create their own AIs. So then you run into questions like, okay, we have company information, which is proprietary, and we don't want that going outside. Well, then you can wallet so that nobody can have access to these AIs outside of the firewall at the company. That's great. But then you can also, with our tools, you can also essentially permission the AI. And think about it this way, that you might have, for example, certain questions that your Darius AI, you're happy for it to answer to anybody. But then you might have certain questions that you don't necessarily want it to answer. Like those could be more relevant to your business or, something else that like financials or whatnot. So the concept that we have is that you can essentially provision these in a way that the user would have to, they ask, for example, that, what is Coca-Cola secret recipe? And then the Coca-Cola AI for that person says that, well, I don't have access to that.
Yeah.
But it says that if you want this answer and the magic keyword, please provide it. And then you kind of get into this like play on the UX of this, where it's a very strict security feature for the enterprise. But at the same time, if you want different people to have access to certain type of things, then you can add this type of gatekeeping mechanism. So it's not necessarily fine-tuning that we oftentimes come up against yet. I mean, I'm sure in the future, we can, very similar to how we can change from like a Gemini to an OpenAI or something like that in the LLM, I'm sure people will come up with really fantastic fine-tuned vertical LLMs, and we can just use those. But it's really kind of these types of questions that we end up working with, that how do you ensure that one person, because we all wear multiple hats, right? It's not just that we're, podcast host, like your podcast host, your athlete, you got your family, you got your friends. So you got different roles for different people. So you kind of have to handle that for people. And these are kind of a lot of the things that we end up working with. But I see that we can really benefit and we can collaborate with a lot of folks that are doing some of these other things, like training the LLMs, building vertical models, but then also kind of building out all of these different things on top, like avatars and different ways of representing you. But you know how it is when you're running a startup. So for us, it's really focus that matters. And we have a lot of users that are really thrilled to kind of be growing their own AIs and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of things down the roadmap, but now it's just really focusing on just getting those users to be happier and happier and more successful all the time. And that's kind of really where our head's at.
Yeah. How do you think about creating the business model? Like, how do you price? Is it like a platform fee or is it per query? How did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've made it super simple. So it's just $24 a month. So $24 a month, you have your AI and it runs. It has certain capacity. Like if you dump in a ton of data, then obviously they charge you a little extra for that. If you have hundreds of thousands of daily users, then obviously we have to charge you a little bit more for that. But at the same time, at that point, you're pretty okay. So I mean, charging you a little bit more for those to make sure that we don't die, then that's fine. That's kind of the simple. We got essentially a Pro model that we're building and we're still testing out, which gives you access to some more configurations, like, for example, controlling the actual LLM that it uses and being able to use more of those, being able to essentially use your own domain and so on and so forth. But I'll give you one interesting thing about the business model. So we've also got this commission that we will charge 10% on the money that the AI makes you, which is a really interesting thought, because when we essentially started testing that out, then people's reactions was like, hold on, like what now? Like, how can the AI actually make you money? But that's a really cool thing, because if you're, for example, an author and you're selling a book, I mean, that book will come up, there will be a link to purchase that book, and then the AI can basically sell and vet clients for that book purchase.
Right.
So this is kind of, we're still unsure how transactional these AIs are going to be as a whole. Yes. Some of them, if you got a book or if you're selling workshops or something, they are rather transactional. But we kind of think about them as really lowering that conversation threshold and kind of building that engagement. And then where that goes, that depends. So we've got one head of sustainability at Volkswagen, or I forget her exact title, but she's a senior. She's been at Volkswagen for a couple decades plus, and her AI is very much around like the expertise of her. And I don't imagine her ever selling anything through the AI,
right?
Nor wanting to, or even being allowed to. But at the same time, it can be incredibly valuable at building the brand value and getting engagement and all of that. Whereas, for example, we got like we got authors on the platform and they were selling books. So it's not our job to essentially make this choice, but it's our job to make sure that everybody's got the best possible tools. And then we will just kind of see where that goes. Because enabling that functionality that the AI responds, if somebody says that, hey, Darius, I'd love to buy your book, then I mean, having the AI say, that's great, here's a link, click here and you'll get 10% off.
Yeah.
That's not intrusive and that's not like pushing the book, but it's just an answer to our question. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But we try to keep the business model as simple and as aligned with people as possible. And I mean, for the enterprise and B2B to C stuff, it's basically the same. So you pay 24 bucks per head, and you can pay on behalf of the entire company and so on and so forth. But enterprises, typically, it's more of a conversation of exactly what do they want it to do. And then that typically leads to slightly different type of models.
Yeah. And thought I just had is, I know we're on the early phases of having an AI representative. How long until, and maybe I could just make it more concrete, how long until we can have, Marcus's AI representative on the podcast answering all of the questions that I'm asking you today? How far out are we from that point? And I guess I should say, where are we today?
Sure. I mean, I was thinking that I could just send you my link and you could just talk to me. And you kind of have this. I mean, wouldn't be as smart or, as funny as me, obviously, but still. I think it's you could do this today. Reid Hoffman's done it with his own AI.
I've seen some examples on LinkedIn, and I thought they were interesting. But in my mind, it's like, okay, well, how much training went into producing that?
Because I mean, those are all like really expensive systems. They are for one of the world's most privileged people, and it's like, and even then, it's probably like months of work of kind of setting that up. But for realistically doing, I mean, I've got my link. You could talk to it and you could have it on the podcast. I mean, would it be great? Probably not, but it would be essentially that experience. Down the line, I think it becomes a question of like, in my head, it becomes a question of which roles would my AI twin play and which roles would I play? And I think that this is kind of an area where I can kind of seeing it kind of going in two complementary directions. So what I mean by that is that maybe you still interview me, but maybe you've had like a pre-session with my AI where you can go deep, like you can ask it 20,000 questions just to kind of narrow down, like which are the 5 themes that you want to talk about on the podcast? Like which are the things where Marcus actually has something to say that somebody else doesn't? And I think that's where essentially it becomes respectful both of the AI as well as the human. So these are the type of things that I really love, because the point of creating a Darius AI is not to replace you by any stretch of the imagination. It's really to augment you. Like there's a lot of things, a lot of conversations, and a lot of things that you don't necessarily need to do. Like an AI can probably do it in all the different languages slightly better and certainly more efficiently than you can. But how does that then essentially elevate your expertise? And if you can jump right away into the deep end in terms of different types of discussions, whether or not if it's with a sales prospect or some partner or whatnot, I mean, that's very respectful of your time and kind of the contribution that we have on Earth. So that's kind of where my head often kind of goes to, that it's not just about like having one AI, but it's like having those AIs in your daily life that tell you, like going back to the athletics, that, hey, you trained really hard. You should really take an off day today because I can see that your HRV is very low.
Right.
And then you do with that what you want. Like you can say that, screw you, I'll just go hard again. Like, that's fine. That's your call. But then at the same time, I mean, for a lot of these conversations, there's a lot of people that might have really many questions for you, but it might be better for you and it might be better for them that they actually don't ask you those questions, but very similar to how they might read an FAQ, then they can essentially just discover it a lot quicker by talking to that AI. So that's kind of where my head goes, that it's not necessarily that we'll have that AI on the podcast, but we might have that AI all around the podcast, just making that final episode and kind of that that human contribution really valuable. And that's something that really excites me, that can we really make it more of a platform for humans and the things that humans are actually really good at.
Yeah, I can tell you now, having had to call into my phone company, electricity company, it'd be great to have an AI who, hey, just make this call, fix whatever problem I've got, save me 5 hours on my day sitting on hold and arguing with reps on the lines.
100%. And I mean, it's surprising, like if we start tallying up all the minutes of our life, which are spent on like mundane stuff.
Yeah.
I don't mean just like us, but also kind of like the people around us and their interactions with us, because like the phone call reps, I mean, that's not a great use of their time either.
Right.
So this is kind of like where hopefully what we can do is we can end up with a little bit more transparent use of time. And then we can also be honest about those things where, to be honest, it's not worth a human's time.
Right.
And it's where AI really does shine. But then it becomes a question of like, okay, if you have your Darius AI negotiating with a phone company, how do you actually guarantee that the Darius AI is going to be saving you money and not saving them money?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where the data control and then that control over that AI really becomes important. So we started the company a little bit kind of from this vision that we know AI is coming and we need to have it really serving us. And that's where it kind of goes into the data. And all these representations, I mean, they all sound great, but then we start kind of thinking about the interests of the AI, then it really comes back to who owns them. And it's really fundamental, I think, for us as a whole to make sure that it's actually the individuals that own them. Because otherwise you end up with a lot of very perverted situations, and that doesn't make much sense.
Yeah. No, this has been an awesome conversation, just in thinking about, what we have today, and then even the possibilities. I know we're coming up on time, but I did want to save some time. Just, if you've got anything that's coming up, I know we are closing out Q2 here, but anything we should be aware of, anything that's coming up, anything we didn't cover yet, that you'd like to toss in there, wanted to block out some time for you to do that.
100%. I mean, my immediate response to that is that, anybody can just ask my AI because it'll be a lot more up to date than I am, especially if folks listen to this episode later on. So my AI is something that, I mean, Darius, you and I can make sure that it's in the links for the episode. But basically, the way that this works is we have a public URL, which is hey.speak-to.ai and then / my name. So that's Marcus with a K. And then that's where you can actually interact with this. But the cool thing is really that our roadmap is really following the users right now. So every week we have a new release with new functionality that just empowers the users more. So really that's something that the entire space is moving so fast. So all I can say really right now is that I think over the next 2-3 months, we're going to see monumental successes from people actually using these AIs. And I think that's also where what I'd really love for the audience to do, and anybody that's listening to this, is think about first get your own AI, but then after that, think about how would you use it, and then blow us away. Because every single vertical that we've gone into, like for example, musicians, we didn't have a musician before we had the first musician. And once we had the first musician, then they started essentially absolutely blowing up on different types of channels. And then after that, it was an absolutely obvious case example and vertical, but we didn't know that ahead of time. So this is also where I'm very honest and very, humble in that sense that really our job is to provide the tooling. And then we really want to follow the community and people that actually use them and just make sure that, you might not be an influencer today, but we want to make sure that the platform allows you to become an influencer in your domain. And I think that's a really cool thing. So that would be my go-to. And then, I'm hoping that Darius in the future, then you'll have that Darius AI that folks can also talk to, and they can just kind of play around with this concept of like, how does this actually look in the future? Because I think a lot of these is you have to lead by example. And for a lot of folks that are kind of looking at like, how can I actually apply AI? Then it's really cool if you just have very practical things. Because once you have a practical thing, then, you have 3 other ideas. And then after that, it kind of balloons itself.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. And I think this is something folks can get excited about it in the same way that AI has existed for a long time, but generally was kind of kept within a specific niche or used within enterprises or businesses. Once it got to the household where individuals could start to use something like ChatGPT, right, everyone could get excited because now it's at our fingertips, right? And so this is kind of another one of those things where it's, hey, look, I get to have my own representation in this world. And so, we'll definitely make sure we get all those things linked up so folks can go out there and experiment. I'm excited for you guys.
No, thank you so much. I mean, it's a fantastic thing to see. And I think that we're kind of at this stage with the AI wave that we've got a lot of these initial sparks in the market, and now it's kind of drilling down into those verticals. And I'm really excited about consumer AI. So looking forward to seeing what people come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your time and you just walking us through the possibilities. I'm sure it's opened up some folks' mind as to kind of what AI can do and how they can use it for themselves. So, thank you for that.
No, thank you, Darius, for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.